That's American soft power, right? That's what we should be doing instead of using all this military. George W. Bush and his cronies, man, the damage they did, where we can't look at a country like Iran and everybody agree, like, no, we can't allow that. Like, let's not do any boots on the ground anywhere, but that can't happen. And people's minds right now can't even conceptualize that because of how much their trust was abused from for the last 25 years, right? I do think there are a lot of cultists in the MAGA thing.
So before the election, I debated a couple of right-wing podcasters. One of them is Dan Hollaway, host of the Drinkin Bros podcast and the Citizen podcast. I wanted to do a check-in and probably get frustrated. So let's do it. Dan, how you doing?
I'm living the dream. How about you?
Well, kinda. So, all right, let's start with this, Dan. So far, you happy with Trump?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, look, there's always some gripes and complaints, and I think no matter what's going on, it's incumbent upon people to be harder on their own side than the other side, whatever you consider yourself to be, because that's how we fine-tune things, right? I mean, that should be the incubator at the lowest possible level with the people you agree with the most, and then move that more broadly out. And you and people like me and you can have debates after that. But I would say mostly, we talked about this back in November, but the election for me was about three things. One is securing the homeland, specifically the border, which I think they're doing a good job there. Second is getting debt, which is to mean spending under control. That's not happened. And then advancing the country, and to me that means like American soft power, and then innovating as well, and trying to stay out of direct ground combat wars. Okay at that. That's been a mixed bag as well, but more or less, yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right, that seems like an honest analysis. That's exactly what we expect from you. So before we get to war in America first, which is what I'm most interested in for the purposes of this conversation, give me one or two things that you're unhappy with on the Trump administration.
Yeah, what well, see, the thing that I'm most unhappy about is the inability to codify spending cuts, and to me, that's mostly not a Trump problem. That's a Congress problem. I mean, we know these people aren't going to do this stuff. I've seen very little movement on that, and for Trump's part, the big beautiful bill, don't support that at all. I think omnibus bills were the devil 12 months ago, and from my perspective, they're still not good. So you're not going to convince me that they're great now, no matter what. No matter what's in them, and no matter what clever name Trump comes up with for it, I'm not going to support that. I understand why you would do it, because you've got Congress to get through, and you're trying to get a lot of stuff done in 4 years. You don't have the opportunity to get reelected and stuff like that. But I haven't seen anything to really persuade Congress to cut spending or codify into the DOGE cuts, which is mostly waste, fraud, and abuse, or anything like that. And personally, I think it's a fantasy that the Senate rescission bill is going to significantly cut anything. I really just don't believe that. I mean, they were celebrating over, I think, $9 billion in DOGE cuts, which would fund the government for 12 hours. So that's nothing, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so I'm curious about the details though, because I agree with a lot of what you just said. The omnibus bills are a problem because they just stuff it full of pork, and they stuff it with all these extraneous things, and then you never get to find out, hey, what do they think about this or that? They should view, and Tom Massey agrees with us, and so do people on the left, right? So, but we probably disagree on some of the spending cuts. So real quick, give me your thoughts on these three, right? So one is the Medicaid and SNAP cuts. I'm against them. They're about 1.1 trillion, and we're also doing a tax cut for people making above $500,000. That's also 1.1 trillion. So I take that as just taking it from the poor and giving to the rich. If you didn't give them to the rich, then I say, okay, well, at least you're saving money, et cetera. So but I'm curious what you think about that. And then Progressive Ro Khanna, he found like 12 trillion in cuts, but you'd have to cut the Pentagon. I'm curious what you think about that. And things like oil subsidies. We give away $17 billion every single year to the oil companies. So what's your take on those three?
Well, I mean, it's complex, right? Obviously, all of these things are. As far as Medicaid and SNAP go, I think that so this is my position. I think you and I will probably disagree with this, but I think it's the citizens' job to take care of each other, not the government. I don't trust government to do that. And they've shown historically that they're not only incapable of doing it, but they hold the ability to do it over your head to extract more labor and wealth from the population. That to me is unacceptable. Now, people in general will get the government that they ask for. And by asking for, I mean, if you sit around, if you don't know your neighbor's name and don't talk to those people and go down there and help them, then you're going to get big government coming in trying to have these super wasteful Medicaid and SNAP benefits programs that take money out of your pocket, and that's exactly what they do. The problem is, it is a legitimate problem, and it's not being addressed. I tell people this on my shows all the time. Just because you don't like somebody's solution to a problem doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And if you pretend it doesn't, then people that you disagree with, or even that are bad actors, are going to come in and solve that problem. What I haven't heard is any kind of legitimate replacement for that, right? And it's the same as Obamacare. I believe the Republican Congress voted 63 times over a 10-year period or so to repeal Obamacare when they never had the votes to do it. They had the votes 2 times in 2019, and they voted twice to end it, and 7 and 9 Republicans respectively voted to keep it, right? These people are full of it. None of them actually want to solve any of these problems because solved problems don't get out the vote. When it comes to tax cuts, that to me is the wrong conversation. We should be talking about cutting spending, right? If you cut spending, there's no need for these taxes. But because these people in Washington refuse to even participate in that conversation at all, then we're never going to get that, right? I mean, this is you and I having a conversation where we agree about 95% of stuff. We just disagree on how to solve it. But the reality of the situation is that nobody in Washington representing us even cares about solving this problem.
Yeah. So look, you're right that we have plenty to disagree on there, and if we sat down and figured out how to do Medicaid and SNAP or how to fix for those issues, that would be a super interesting conversation. We have limited time here.
Well, the way I would solve it is I would stop letting churches get tax-free status if they don't solve these problems, because that's the reason they're getting tax-free status. Am I right?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting idea, and that's why it's important to have these conversations. So, but let's keep going. What did you think about? So I don't know if you saw, but I asked them to cut the Pentagon. They said they'd do it, and I was thinking, well, I'll believe it when I see it, right?
Sure.
And then they didn't. They added to it. What was your take on that?
Well, I guess the question is, what would you cut from the Pentagon?
Yeah, easy. They can't pass an audit. They say, I don't know where at least 400 billion is. Then I'm going to give you 400 billion less until you figure out where the money's going.
I think that's fair. Yeah. I mean, honestly, they haven't passed an audit, I think, since 2000. Is that right? I think that's what it is.
No, they've never passed an audit since they started auditing the Pentagon. They've never once passed one.
That's not shocking to me, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, look, the sole function of the government is to protect the homeland, right? And I know that there are a lot of people who are either pacifist or non-interventionist, or people that are just, I guess, nihilistic about government being able to be trusted to do these things. And I understand that. I mean, the amount of damage that George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and their entire crew did to this country, where we can't look at a country like Iran and say there's no way, and the world agrees, there's no way, even Saudi Arabia is like, you can't let them have nukes. And this is the conversation we should have been having in '96 when North Korea finally developed a bomb. Instead, Clinton was allowing China into the World Trade Organization with no caveats at all, as well as bombing Iraq for no reason and getting involved in balkanization for no reason. That had nothing to do with us, but a nuclear North Korea has to do with a lot of people. And we had a lot of opportunity there, especially since China was begging to get into the WTO. And all we had to do was say, okay, you make sure North Korea doesn't get nukes. That's the standard. If they get them, then you're out of the WTO, period. And that would have been a good deal. But we don't do that. That's American soft power, right? That's what we should be doing instead of using all this military. I agree with you. I think the Pentagon's got to answer for this stuff. And it's very patriotic in a lot of ways to root for the DOD, but I root for the soldier, because that's what I was, right? I root for the guy on the ground not getting sent to do stupid stuff, one, getting taken care of when he comes back home, and then ensuring that we're actually using the right kind of American power to influence the world.
Yeah, so Dan, so let's get to war, right? So Trump bombs Iran, and at that point, I was super pissed. And he said anti-war, and you're not anti-war if you start a war. Now, he did then demand a ceasefire and got one from Israel. For the moment being, their defense minister today was threatening to end the ceasefire. So first, give me a sense of how you reacted to both of those events.
Yeah, so I would have done that as well, given what I know about that situation for sure. And I think, it was it's hard to argue with the results. I don't like to do that necessarily. Start from the outcome and work backwards when you're assessing something, because who knows if they actually knew. Sometimes people get lucky. I don't think Trump got lucky here. Nobody wants a nuclear Iran. Remember from the first administration, the Abraham Accords were a very good idea. He's trying to, for lack of a better phrase, weaponize the economic interests of Middle Eastern countries so that they'll stop participating in this 7th century nonsense and move into modernity. It's very smart. That's what MBS is trying to do as well, and we should try to help these people do that. Now, and if Iran wants to continue doing this stuff, then the global community's got to deal with them in some way. And I'll say this as well. When it comes to the Middle East, ceasefire is always appended with "we'll see," right? I mean, there's no end to that situation until there is one, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I would have done the same thing as him, but I do understand the criticism as well. Is why I said George W. Bush and his cronies, man, the damage they did, where we can't look at a country like Iran and everybody agree, like, no, we can't allow that. Like, let's not do any boots on the ground anywhere, but that can't happen. And people's minds right now can't even conceptualize that because of how much their trust was abused from for the last 25 years, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Dan, let me push back on a couple of things. It's not a debate. I kind of want to see where you're at these days, so it's more informational. But I'm curious, like, so with the nukes, I mean, Netanyahu's been telling us they're going to have nukes within a couple of months since 1996, right? Load of crap. So they were enriching uranium more. I think they were using that as leverage to get us back into the peace treaty that we had. But they had no bomb, right? And they were at least, even Netanyahu admitted afterwards, at least a year away from having the bomb to put the uranium in. At least. Our own intelligence said they actually weren't even developing a bomb. Since 2003, they stopped it, and the Ayatollah did a religious edict saying nuclear weapons are terrible and no one should ever have them. So, like, if you said to me, Iran is about to have a nuke or you do this bombing, okay, that's an interesting question. But Iran wasn't about to have a nuke. It was largely propaganda. So that's why I wouldn't have done the bombing in the first place. And the other thing is, Dan, then it comes with risks, right? So in this case, it turned out okay for now because it didn't devolve further. But what if Iran sank one of our ships? Oh, then that's it. We're off to a gigantic war just like Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, that's hypothetical, and it's one that I don't really think is necessary, to be honest, because we've got recent memory of how they respond when we do something like this. We sent a switchblade through Soleimani's forehead, and they did nothing, right? And so it was publicized this time that they called ahead to let people know, and U.S. military by proxy, that those rockets were on the way. That happened with the Soleimani thing as well. You can reach into your DoD contacts and find that out. As far as Iran's ability and the timeline on when they would get a bomb, when they've established that they want, when they say it openly, they also say death to America and all this stuff. Certainly, part of it is barking, but this is what we said about North Korea through the 80s and 90s. We said, oh, they just rabble-rouse from time to time so people will notice them and they can negotiate. And now they've got bombs, right? So, like, at what point do you interdict that? I think it's a fair debate to have. At what point should we step in and make sure it doesn't happen? We messed it up pretty badly with North Korea. We had a lot of leverage against them, especially since they're basically a Chinese proxy, and never used any of that. We thought we would negotiate one-on-one with them. Even Trump, to be fair, thought he was going to negotiate one-on-one with that guy. And I don't think that was smart either. I don't think that's something that we can do in the Mideast. But, you don't want to wait until the bomb exists. And I'll say something else. You talk about risk. A lot of people on I guess you could say the anti-war side, although I don't think anybody's actually purely anti-war. People just are anti-wars they disagree with. But let's say that for the sake of this conversation, one of the comments was that Iran has escalatory dominance in the region. No, they don't. They could certainly do stuff that might provoke us in the region, but we could wipe that country out in a couple of weeks if we wanted to without boots on the ground. We've got the munitions to do that. Not that we would or should. I'm not making a statement that we should, but Iran is going to operate in its own best self-interest. And they're not a rational actor. They're trying to buy time so they can get a bomb, in my opinion. This is the intelligence that I've seen. And you can, talk to Persian people that have escaped that regime, and they probably would agree with you, right? So I tend to listen when people bring up things like, excuse me, socialism or communism has never been done the right way or whatever, and I hear somebody that's come from one of those countries tell me the evils of it, I tend to listen to the person that has the experience.
Yeah, I think they're a terrible regime, but there's a dichotomy here where we say they can't even, they're so incompetent they can't even strike back, and they kind of have shown that a bunch of times, right? You're right about the Soleimani, they didn't really strike back. Here, they didn't really strike back, etc. But we're saying, but at the same time, they're so super sophisticated that they could have a nuclear bomb any second. So I'm way more skeptical. But I do want to go back to one other question that's important because I want to know where your head's at. And a rough sense of where you think MAGA is for, loosely speaking, right? Where's the red line for you, Dan? So let's say that it had kept going, right? And Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz and hit one of our ships and drone strikes on our troops and etc. And then we strike back and then is there a point where you go, wait, this is too much war. We said anti-war and now we're knee deep in it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't support a boots on the ground situation in that country, no matter what happened, because I know I've done it and it doesn't work. There's no way that a bunch of white faces march into Tehran and change that situation ever. That will, at no point in all of human history will that ever be effective. So it's a cost benefit analysis. With regard to the Strait of Hormuz, China is never going to allow that to happen. They would lose a lot of money. So it's just not going to happen. But it's something I like to have the conversation. I like to flush this all out because people have assumptions about this. Like if you're an anti-war person or you're a neocon or you're this or that, no matter what you are, if you don't actually have the conversation and say, here are the cards on this side and here are the cards on this side, here are the potential moves, strategy, et cetera, then we don't really know any of this stuff, right? People kind of shy away from this debate or they think it's adversarial to have the conversation and go through the paces of this. I don't think so. And people seem to think that this specifically, I think to your point, is dividing MAGA. I guess I'm not really sure what people mean when they say MAGA, to be honest, anymore, just like I'm not sure what people mean when they say Republican or Democrat. Those words are completely meaningless to me now. I think people want the thing that they're a part of to be something, and I'm not always sure that it is. I'm sure actually that it's not usually what it is. I'll settle for this anti-leftist coalition, I guess, or maybe that's not even the right way to put it, but this anti-woke coalition that voted for Trump or maybe against Kamala, either way. The group that would or is right now probably and should probably fracture along some lines. They don't agree on everything, nor should they, because it's a very diverse coalition, but they agreed on a couple of things like public safety, keep your hands off our kids. We don't want new wars, protracted stuff like that. And I've said this in the past, but this new coalition, it rose to defeat an installed candidate that they felt was undemocratic and unjust. That's my opinion. And the illegal immigration stuff, they rose to defeat that as well. And it had nothing to do with the old right versus left stuff. I don't think it was about that. I mean, you could see from the polling that it wasn't about that. So this new coalition will probably fracture and grow into what may become the new left and the new right, or parts of the new left and the new right, whatever it happens to be. We're always going to have those two things. My hope is that the extremists on the right that are popping up now, these people that think that Jews are the source of all the world's problems, these 8 million people, or that women are the worst because they couldn't get a date in high school, so now women have no value. This is just not absolute nonsense. Then the grifters who are making money on that, and then the pacifists who I think are so rooted in this anti-war stuff that they can't see the need to prevent evil. I hope they all kind of go back to being quiet to some degree. I actually, the one that I would hang on to is the pacifists, because I like that they drag us, or at least make people question the motive of going to war. I think that's a very useful thing. But the rest of these people that are just, I think, bad actors, I hope they go away, and I hope that this new coalition splits off at some point, becomes a real right and a real left, and they, the people that went to the extremes maybe kind of come back a little bit and start talking to each other again, because otherwise we don't really have a country anymore. We just have a bunch of people standing around yelling at each other.
Yeah. So super last thing here, Dan. So I went on a progressive show that I generally agree with, and we have a conversation just like this. Hey, where's your hat at these days? Where's my hat at these days? It kind of devolved into a debate, but Kyle Kulinski said something that I want to run by you because I genuinely don't know what you're going to say about this. I mean, you partly answered it there, so you give me a little bit better sense of it. But I think you've said some stuff that's the opposite on your show, but I'm not sure. So let me run you this clip and then get your reaction to it.
The only people who are sincere that I will grant you, Cenk, is libertarians, so Thomas Massey and Dave Smith, because libertarians have a track record like Ron Paul did of being very principled, but everybody in MAGA, or 99% of them, will bend the knee, just like 99% of the ones in Congress have already bent the knee.
So, Dan, what's your reaction to that?
I mean, obviously it's hyperbole, and that's all that guy does is speak in hyperbole, and you can tell from his hair. But yeah, I think libertarians are sincere. They prioritize individual liberty above all else, and we need that guy around for sure. We need them advocating for the individual. That's what this country is all about. I do think there are a lot of cultists in the MAGA thing, like the people that are out there supporting the big beautiful bill. 12 months ago, they were talking about how omnibus bills are bad, right? No question. And then you see these smaller fractures that happen. So Iran gets bombed, and Trump makes an offhanded comment about regime change. Now, that was for an audience of one. That was for the Ayatollah, right? To say, don't attack us because we will light you up. And I think, that's how Trump operates. Whether you think that's smart or not is not the question, but that's what happened. And a lot of people, instead of being, adult human beings with brains that function properly and knew that Trump was playing the game there, said, oh yeah, regime change might be an option. Like, what are you, Lindsey Graham? What are you talking about? You know what I mean? So, your principles should not in any way rely on any other person. Otherwise, they're not principles, right?
Yeah, see, that's a interesting nuanced answer. That's what I expected from you, Dan. I didn't know which way you were gonna go, but I expected nuance. So me, you, and Kyle, all of us agreed libertarians are principled. They have an important role. We might not be libertarians, but we appreciate their role in this spectrum. And you agreed that there is some cultists in MAGA and they shift along with whatever Trump says. I agree with that, certainly Kyle agrees with that. Where you and I split from Kyle is, there's also people who are principled and they have different principles and they're not necessarily going to go with everything Trump says. But look, we're all going to find out throughout these next 4 years. And so here you've clearly enunciated some things that you agree with on Trump and things that you disagree with. So listen, brother, I appreciate the conversation and I appreciate that we have it in a level-headed way where you go, okay, I think this and you think that, and everybody gets to hear it out. So
sure.
Thanks.
If we weren't on TV, I'd probably swear a lot more, but that's just how I talk, I'm doing my best over here.
Yeah, me too, brother, me too, believe me. But I've been on Drinkin Bros podcast, a citizen podcast, so you should check that out where we do curse more. All right, Dan, thanks for joining us again, appreciate it, brother.
Yes, sir, have a good night, man.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.